On behalf of the Press Information Bureau, Mumbai, I welcome Kamal Kishore ji, the Member Secretary of the National Disaster Management Authority of India, and who is also the chair of the Disaster Risk Reduction G20 group. And with him, we also have Dr. Krishna Vatsa, member of the National Disaster Management Authority. I would also like to welcome Mahesh Narvekar ji. He's here. He's the Chief of Disaster Management Unit of the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai. And as if you have been following the stories that were released by Press Information Bureau, you would have seen the kind of work that the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai has done with regards to flood management, flooding of different areas of the city. So I would request Narvekar ji to also speak about that so that we reiterate those points that were touched by PIB in the press releases. And if there's anything that you would like to ask of him, you're welcome to do that. I will begin with requesting Kamal Kishore ji to give a brief overview of the 3 days of discussions that have happened in Mumbai, and then we will invite questions. I request all of us to please keep our mobiles on silent. And before you ask the question, introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So we've had a very successful conclusion of this 3-day meeting. It was the second meeting of the newly constituted Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group under G20, under India's presidency. The program was as follows. The first day was a side event where we discussed different aspects of financing, different aspects of disaster risk reduction, from disaster risk reduction and preparedness to recovery and reconstruction to relief, role of insurance, etc. And then on the second day, we had 2 additional side events. One was focusing on the role of risk assessment and some of the work that is being done here in India in that regard. The third side event was the role of private sector. We are here in Mumbai, so many private sector players are based here. How are they looking at disaster risk reduction issues? What are their perspectives? What are their challenges? What is it that we can learn from them? How can we support their efforts? So we had that, and today we had one side event on how we can use ecosystem-based approaches to disaster risk reduction. So these were the side events. In addition to the side events, we also had deliberation on the 5 priorities of the working group, which I highlighted in our interaction before the meeting on Monday. The 5 priorities, to recapitulate, are early warning system for all, a resilient infrastructure, financing frameworks for disaster risk reduction, post-disaster response, particularly recovery and reconstruction, and how do we build back better after disasters, and ecosystem-based approaches to disaster risk reduction. The whole effort has received a lot of appreciation, encouragement, and support from all G20 members, guest countries, as well as international organizations. The next meeting will be held in July, where the outcome of the working group under our presidency will be finalized. I also would like to say that we took advantage of being in Mumbai, and on the first day in the evening, we did 3 things. One, we did a heritage walk in the BMC headquarters, which was hugely appreciated. The citizen groups of Mumbai curated that event, and the way, with great pride, with great care and enthusiasm, they talked about the history of that building and the city, was really something that was appreciated by our guests from across the world. We also saw the control room of BMC for managing disaster-related issues across the city, which was also something which we could share with our guests on how we are dealing with it, what is it that they can draw from it, what is it that we can learn from their experiences. And finally, we had a wonderful cultural event at the Gateway of India, followed by a light and sound show. So the cultural side of it has also been very interesting, very enriching for our guests. They are going back with a very warm feeling towards the experience of being in Mumbai and interacting with the city in whatever limited time they have. So that's all from me. My colleague, Dr. Krishnavats, may want to add something that I may have left, and of course we have our colleagues from Mumbai as well.
Just a very sincere note of gratitude to the government of Maharashtra, which organized this event and extended a very warm welcome to all the delegates and representatives from various countries, and it was an extremely well organized event. And I think the venue and all the arrangements were absolutely of the first order. So a huge message of gratitude and appreciation for the government of Maharashtra's support. Thank you.
I think I have to reinforce that. That was absolutely brilliant, from stay to, transport to facilities here to Government of Maharashtra's LOs that assisted our guests. We have set a very high benchmark for hospitality here in Mumbai. We just felt, not just us, even our guests felt that we were somebody's personal guest in this city.
Maheshji, would you like to say something about the measures taken by BMC? Then we can ask questions.
Yeah. So let me just at the outset let me thanks the NDMA for hosting this event in Mumbai. Mumbai, you all know that it's moderately vulnerable to all disasters. Though we are working in this field since last 30 years, the from 2005 deluge in Mumbai, we have enhanced our system. But these such events, when we have some experts exchanging their views, exchanging their knowledge sharing is very important. That is what has happened out of this. So we can enhance our existing system because we have taken a lot of non-structural measures as well as structural measures in Mumbai, because Mumbai being a coastal city is, it's always have a tidal effect, and during monsoon the flooding is a major issue in Mumbai. The flood mitigation programs also, BMC is doing a lot of work. Of course, we are also getting some financial support from the National Disaster Management Authority under National Disaster Mitigation Fund. So these such events happening in Mumbai is definitely helpful to the Mumbai. Especially, I would like to just underline here about the Apada Mitras. Recently, just a few months back, we have trained 1,000 Apada Mitras in Mumbai city and suburb, and they were actually contributed in this event. They were engaged with the delegates, and to them, because they are trained in response and now they have interacted with them in DRR. So we wanted to strengthen their capability in the prevention and mitigation as well, along with the response. So such events will be definitely useful for Mumbai's disaster management enhancement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So now you all can start with the, yeah, Shama.
So Shama from can you hear me? Yeah, Shama Mishra from Doordarshan. So is there any consensus on, forming some sort of alliance for creating funds, dedicated funds for DRR?
So the G20 is not an implementation platform. It does not create a new funds or anything. It makes the existing mechanisms more effective by working together. So there is an emerging consensus on the key priorities of the group and what are the things that we should work on, some knowledge work that the group is trying to do. So on that, there is an emerging consensus. There's a lot of work before us. but there's no discussion of a creation of a new fund, etc., because that's not how G20 works.
Thank you.
I mean, two side events. One was yesterday about overall the financial mechanism of this entire DRR. So, how the countries have come forward? Like, you talked about as far as the floodplain this thing is concerned, US can be the best model. Then the Indonesian model about roping in this all those various agencies and all. So, how India fared into this kind of a scheme of thing? That's one question. And secondly, very interesting. Basically, talks with regard to the private sector participation. So, can you just tell us about how private sector is definitely enthused about bringing in their resources here?
So on the first point, there are many different models of financing different aspects of disaster risk reduction. In the last few years, we have developed a system whereby we support the entire range of disaster risk reduction needs, not just disaster response or reconstruction and recovery, but also risk reduction and preparedness. So that kind of sharing has really evoked a lot of interest from the others. At the same time, there are interesting models from other countries, how the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the US deals with flood, what is their experience with flood insurance, what has worked, what has not worked. So there are many examples that we can learn from, and there are many things that we can contribute to. On the issue of private sector, it was a very engaging, long conversation with a number of groups. We heard from them how they manage disaster risk, what is their expectation from the public sector in terms of providing them information on risk, updating regulations, and building codes in line with the most current understanding of disaster risk, and so on. So it was an opportunity to understand their perspective, what they are doing for themselves, and what is it that they want in terms of enabling conditions to be created by the public sector for their effective risk management.
I mean, one of the distinguishing features between the developed and developing country is the insurance coverage. That in developed countries, the protection gap is much lower, and here the protection gap is much higher. Lower, and in the developing countries, protection gap is much higher. So there are several ways in which the protection gap needs to be lowered, and insurance coverage needs to be expanded, and it requires learning from various insurance models, and one which Kamal Kishore ji referred, the flood insurance program in the US. There are similar programs elsewhere. It's important to develop public-private partnerships in the area of insurance so that the governments in developing countries are not just dependent upon the public funding. They also have access to the capital markets and the insurance mechanisms for funding and financing their disaster risks. Thank you.
Hi, sir. My name is Gaurav Narula. I'm from the True Hunt Online. Sir, just an example, like we have got an early alarming system which is much talked about in the recent past about earthquakes. So if we are talking about, encouraging private players also to come up with the system, so what can be done on the government side or the public administration side so that these kind of things can be encouraged for the private players or private sector units with the companies so that these systems are installed in their units so that it can help, of course, the common citizens as well?
Are you specifically talking about earthquake?
Sir, it's just an example I just mentioned before. It's just an example because it's talked about in the recent past. There is an earthquake alarming system which is.
See, just two quick points here. One is that for different kinds of hazards, uh, earthquakes, floods, landslides, and so on, tsunamis, cyclones, there are different levels of early warning capabilities available. And from the government side, from the public sector side, it is uh, important that that early warning and that early warning system is made available as a public good. By that, we not only mean that the information should be available, but it should be available in a usable, useful, understandable, actionable format to common citizen, and we should have a way of reaching the last mile. And on that, Government of India, state governments have made a lot of efforts in the last few years. We have rolled out, for example, a common alerting protocol which pushes messages to all cell phones in the affected area about imminent hazards. So this is something which is clearly an area of priority. It is not just about the scientific aspect of the forecast and warning, but it's also dissemination to the last person.
Sir, like for the solars, if we talk about residential, there is an encouragement of giving subsidies. So these kind of alarming systems would be taken by the subsidies to encourage the private players in future, if it is discussed about.
I think the solar and alarming systems are not exactly comparable. You know, they are very different things. I think it is very important that the alerts and alarms are generated from an authorized source. You know, if you have, so of course private players can come in and help with the dissemination of it. But it is really important that whatever alert is generated is authorized, and it's not, you know, I mean, who is accountable for generating the right alert at the right time in the right format so that it does not create panic. It actually enhances preparedness and the right kind of response.
Like yesterday, one of the observations you and couple of your participants made at yesterday's this thing was money is required for to cutting this risk. But what is you also insisted and others is that the operationalization of that money. So how this can be done? And the next thing that you also mentioned about there has been definitely an increasing trend about what you said to have a development of a national system and a risk pooling area. Can you just explain on that?
I think the point is that the main point which was discussed day before yesterday, one main point, was that yes, of course, you need resources for doing disaster risk reduction work, but resources themselves are not enough. You also need capacity. You know, so if you want to do landslide risk mitigation, you need people who understand how landslides occur, how they can be mitigated, how do you set up a program for that. So I think we need to move, you know, on both the fronts, on resourcing these efforts and developing capacities for utilizing these resources at the same time.
Kamalji, this is Chittaranjan from Times of India. Basically, as you said earlier, that there were discussions on the existing mechanisms during the deliberations. So I would like to ask you, since Mumbai has large number of, creeks, rivulets, holding ponds around, but most of them, either they are encroached, highly polluted, and eventually they result in floods. So was there any broad discussions, especially keeping Mumbai in your thought process or the center of the.
So this was a global discussion. We did not discuss any specific city, Mumbai or any other flood-prone city in any other country. However, at the level of principles, we did have a discussion just today on how we can use ecosystem-based approaches by reviving, for example, by reviving rivers, streams, natural reservoirs, mangroves, wetlands to increase our capacity to manage disaster risk.
I'll just add to sir that the river regeneration is already we have started the Mithi River, which is a major carrier. So the Mithi River regeneration, of course, that is also funded by the NDMF, by the NDMA. So the Mithi regeneration work is already started. We are gradually regenerating all other four rivers also. So that work gradually, again the groundwater surfacing, the tube wells which we have, that is also, we are planning to regenerate those rivers and so that those wells can be the holding ponds. So the work already in process.
The delegates made while they saw the control room, the preparedness of the BMC. Can you share?
I think the whole package of heritage building inside a heritage building, a modern control center followed by cultural program, it was overwhelming for our guests in a positive way. So I don't have any specific remarks of who said what, but they all carried a very good, not just a very good impression, but also a very warm feeling.
My question is for Mr. Narvikar. I'm Gitanjali from Governance Now. A lot of reports have said that the Mumbai seafront will be submerging in water by 2030. What are the measures being taken for that? Is quite alarming.
See, the WRI's report in Mumbai Climate Action Plan has stated, that some the coastal area will submerge by 2050. The Mumbai Climate Action Plan is accepted by the state government, and we are working on climate adaptation as per the Mumbai Climate Action Plan. I think that will take care of, but it cannot be assured that, the climate action plan is definitely the adaptation of climate action plan is in process.
I request Kamal Kishore to just speak briefly about the Sendai framework of the United Nations, under which this whole disaster risk reduction action plan by various governments fall into, so that you all will have a better perspective, a whole kind of a wider perspective of what this is all about.
So in March 2015, in Sendai, which is a place in Japan, 187 countries adopted a global framework called Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Under that framework, there are 4 priorities and 7 targets. The 4 priorities are understanding risk, meaning where disasters can happen, how much damage they can cause, how frequently they can happen, and so on. And the second priority was to improve disaster risk governance, have capacities, have laws, have regulations, have codes to actually address disaster risk and manage disaster risk. The third priority was to invest in disaster resilience by making the right kinds of allocations in different sectors, as well as standard alone allocations, using the right kind of financial instruments to improve disaster risk management. And the fourth priority was to have systems for more efficient disaster response, including more efficient and better reconstruction and recovery after disasters, so that when we rebuild after disasters, we build better than before. So these are the 4 priorities: understand risk, improve disaster risk governance, invest in resilience, and improve disaster response, disaster preparedness, build back better. And the progress was to be measured against 7 targets. Out of these 7 targets, 4 targets are related to reduction in losses, and 3 targets are related to increase in capacities. The loss reduction targets are as follows: reduction in mortality per 100,000 people, normalized by population; reduction in number of people that are affected by disasters, people who lose their livelihoods or lose their houses or their property. So reducing the number of affected people, people affected by disasters. Then the third was to reduce economic losses from disasters. And the fourth was to reduce loss to infrastructure and infrastructure services. So there was a time when a cyclone would come and for 2 months no electricity. How do you reduce that 2 months to 2 days? So these are the 4 loss reduction targets and 3 targets related to increase in capacity. One target is on how do we have better plans and strategies at all levels, at the national level, state level, local level. For example, in our country now, all states have a disaster management plan. 90% of the districts have a district disaster management plan. So increasing the plans and strategies. And the second target was increasing the coverage of early warning system for all hazards, for cyclones, floods, lightning, everything, increasing the coverage of early warning systems. And finally, improving or increasing international cooperation in this area. So last week, just before our meeting here in Mumbai, in New York, there was a high-level meeting at the midpoint of the Sendai framework, which is a 15-year framework, 2015 to 2030, to take stock of what is the progress. And what we are realizing is that out of the 7 targets, except one target, which is the plans and strategies one, progress is not satisfactory on all of these. So in that context, whatever G20 does becomes very important, because if G20 succeeds in its disaster risk reduction effort as 20 largest economies, then it will have an effect, a positive effect for the rest of the world as well.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, we can wind up here. I would like to thank everybody from the Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, especially Mrinalini and her colleagues, for all the support and help extended for the Press Information Bureau to work in the media and communication plan for this G20 meeting. I would also like to thank the media of Mumbai, the channels and the newspapers, for unwaveringly supporting all the G20 coverages that has been organized, the press conferences, side events, etc., for the G20s that we have had in the city. And I think this is the last of the G20s that Mumbai will host. So I would like to thank my friends in the media once again, and I hope that we will meet again for some other event of this stature. It has been a great experience, a learning experience for not only PIB, but I think also for our friends in the media to cover this kind of an event being held in Mumbai. Thank you. Please have a cup of tea before you all leave.